Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to TestTube Plus. I'm Trace. This is episode 2 of 5 in our series on weather. If you've never listened to our show before, we do 5 episodes in a row on one topic. That way we can all understand it a little bit better. Today we're going to talk about how humans have affected the weather. But we probably should break down the difference between weather and climate. A lot of people get these confused. Weather is short term. Weather can last minutes, like a quick downpour, that's weather. It can also last months, like wintertime. That's also weather. Weather is basically the way the atmosphere is behaving now. This is according to NASA, who observe a lot of our weather thanks to their weather satellites. Climate is the long-term pattern of weather. So if weather is short-term, take a bunch of weather together, and you get climate. Climate is the weather of a particular area over time. So pretty easy, right? Weather short-term, climate long-term. For a bit of perspective, though, on the global climate, Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic figured out how the climate clock cycles. A lot of what we talk about is in terms of extinction and geologic events. One of those is ice ages. And the climate clock works as a 100,000-year cycle. Every 100,000 years, the Earth gets a little closer or farther away from the sun, and these tiny motions are enough to change our climate and cause ice ages. They happen sometimes, really not a big deal. Currently, we should be in a cooling period, according to a NASA study from the early 20th century, but we're actually not. We're not in that cooling period. Why? I'm glad you asked. Climate change. Yep, if you're a denier, I'm sorry for you, because it's real, and it's happening right now, and this is everybody's favorite topic. Global warming or climate change is an average surface temperature increase on our planet, and it is being affected by humanity. It's being affected by humanity because of our activity. We cover most of the planet. More than 80% of the planet has some human activity evidence on it. That is more than any other species alive today, for sure. Scientific consensus maintains that climate change is due to fossil fuels in the major part. By the way, I did say scientific consensus because, yes, there are some scientists who deny it, but I'm not going to give them any play on this show because they're so small a number and their papers are so small in terms of the number published that it's not worth talking about. Scientific consensus says that climate change is due to fossil fuels for the most part. They release carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, into the atmosphere, and that affects how the Earth can handle itself, essentially. We're affecting stuff all over the damn place. Evidence suggests that sulfur-laced aerosol exhaust emitted by cargo ships on the ocean can change the structure of high clouds in our atmosphere, making them more reflective and possibly cooling temperatures over the water. That affects our overall climate, which that might be a good thing, but we'll come back to that, don't worry. Agriculture can also affect how sunlight is reflected and absorbed, and thus affect the overall climate of our planet. And maybe you've heard of this, it's the famous cow farts problem. Essentially, how we're using our land is releasing different gases than if it was covered in forest, say. So cows release a lot of methane because they eat a lot of plants. Then they're using their digestive tract, which is a complicated process that you can watch over on DNews if you like. But they break down all of those grains and grasses and they release a lot of methane. Methane is 20 times more harmful than CO2. So that's bad. There's also deforestation in general. So as our land use is changing, we are affecting what is happening in the atmosphere again, because trees aren't absorbing as much carbon dioxide. And those trees are no longer there to also block how the sun hits the Earth. It's not just humans, though. To say that humans are the only thing causing global climate change, global warming, climate change in general, is false. We're not alone in this. There are also natural causes. Volcanic activity can cause short-term effects on our climate. There's changes in solar radiation patterns. The sun is in a period of high activity at the moment. Earth's orbit around the sun that I mentioned earlier in the 100,000-year ice age cycle can affect how our climate works. Plus, as the Earth warms, which is probably due to us, it will release more methane trapped in polar regions. That's naturally trapped there. As that's released, we're even more screwed. But it's not entirely all our fault. We're just kind of spurring it on. On top of that, pollution in the atmosphere can rain down on that white snow, turning it darker colored. Then it absorbs more sunlight, causing it to heat up, causing it to melt, and release more methane. All this is great, right? This sounds great. On top of that, clouds can change. Cloud cover can change, affecting how the sun hits the earth and how things warm. In the end, though, is the weather changing? That's not. The weather isn't actually changing too much. It still rains, it's still hot, it's still cold. We're going to experience that for a long time. It's just different. The climate is different. How things are in their extremes are different. The CDC has a quote that says, "The frequency and intensity of all types of extreme weather events, heat waves, cold snaps, floods, storms, and lightning, is expected to increase in the future as a result of these changing weather patterns." I think a lot of people have a question, especially coming to a science show like ours, that is, why are people even denying climate change? Why? What's the point? And you know what? That's really hard to answer. However, there was a study in Nature Climate Change in 2012 that compared 1,540 Americans, and they asked a very simple question. How much risk do you believe climate change poses to human health, safety, or prosperity? Climate change is scary stuff. So measuring the risk that people believe they are going to experience is pretty important. When they did the study, they controlled for aspects of science literacy, mathematics understanding, and overall intelligence. So they weren't just like, dumb people do this. They could look at it and they could say, these people understand science, these people understand math, these people are of various IQ levels, and they can use statistics to compare those all and weight them all equally. And surprisingly, folks with greater science literacy, people who may actually be coming to a show like this one, said that they were less concerned with the risk of climate change. Only slightly less so, but they were still less. So then they kind of changed tack, because you would think that people who don't understand science, they would be the ones who would be less concerned, or at least I would think that. I would think if you don't know science, then you'd be like, well, this is dumb. I don't get it, and so therefore I'm not worried about it. But in fact, it wasn't the case. It was the other way around. But if you look at it as egalitarian versus hierarchical, now the numbers are cool. People who are egalitarian or believe in equality and that everybody is important and they understand the community around them as equally important with themselves, they were way more concerned about climate changes. Hierarchical people, or people who believe that some are better than others and it's built in that way, and some they care about those at their own level and maybe not those above or below them, they were less concerned, which is really interesting. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, the study itself is kind of inconclusive. That's fine. But if you look at this study and you think about it this way, perhaps it has to do with compassion. Compassion about the environment around us. Compassion about the protection of our fellow man. The understanding that other people who live on islands, who live on the coast, are going to be affected by climate change, but so are the people who live in the middle, people who live near deserts, people who live in rainforests. Everyone is going to be affected. And if you have compassion for all of that, then of course you're going to care more about climate change. There's also questions as to whether climate change affects me every day, and it may not. It may never affect you. You may never have to deal with the lasting effects of climate change, but you know who will? Your grandkids or your great-grandkids or your great-great-grandkids, essentially humanity in the future. If you want us to keep going, we're going to have to do something about it. Maybe it's that the hierarchical folks are more likely to move forward and just think, you know what, I'm going to get my head down. I'm not hurting climate change. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to run. I'm just going to do my thing. You know, all of those things are completely valid if short-sighted. In the end, there are a lot of conspiracies about science and the science of this, and whether there's climate-denying research that's being covered up, whether there's, also whether people are funding climate deniers. Maybe we'll do a future conspiracies episode. Let us know in the comments if you want us to do that. But the question is, when it comes to climate change, are we screwed? Right? Are we screwed? We're not yet, but we're pretty close. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that we will have to radically change our approach to energy production and consumption if we want to not go down the road of climate change. We may reach the point of no return for that decision by 2042. That's some scary stuff, man. 2042, they won't even have opened the Nickelodeon time capsule by then. That doesn't open until 2046. I'm excited about it. Been excited since I was a kid. We'll never see it. Climate change. But what can we do to combat it? We'll get there later. So I'll leave you with this. Jason Box, who is on Twitter at climate_ice, is a widely published climatologist. And he tweeted on July 29th of 2014, if even a small fraction of Arctic sea floor carbon is released to the atmosphere, we're effed. This is a climatologist talking about how we're going to be screwed if even a little bit of this carbon gets out, and we are on a path to that, folks. If we do nothing, this is coming. And we may reach the point of no return by 2042. That's some scary stuff. And what can we do about it? We'll get there later. So make sure you subscribe to TestTube Plus so you can get all of our episodes every day. This was episode 2 of 5 on weather, so make sure you come back tomorrow for episode 3.